Marinations is TV that thinks it's radio. Marinations is a magazine under the covers. Marinations is a nutritious stew of nature, culture, and ideas. Hello and welcome to Marinations. I'm Sharon Skolnick-Bagnoli. This season, Marinations is bringing to you everyday heroes and local treasures. People whose intentionality and efforts are changing the world around them in some way. People like you. So, Bret Arenson,
yes,
we're here and we're talking about your art, and more interesting to me even than your art is your journey as an artist. So, could you please tell me what you're working on right now?
Right now, I've decided to follow two different directions. I've been working lots of different directions, lots of explorations, and I've honed it down to two that I think are most intriguing. One's sort of an old one where I've worked on before, where there are spontaneous work done on canvases that are rectangular, sort of like a human size, shape, not necessarily size, but human shape. And they're multiples, so they look like niches, like in a Catholic church, where they would be figurines. But there's no figurines, there's just the shape of a rectangle. And with a very spontaneous delineation of lines with a certain brush that I use. And I think that's been effective. I'm also working something else that I think is very interesting, where I'm introducing into a spontaneous way of working imagery. And I'm doing this through reliefs and masks, so I work spontaneously, but through the stencils and the reliefs, images are brought into it. So that's sort of new for me, because before there was nothing necessarily recognizable in my work.
Yeah, it's like in the beginning there was the void, and it's just very biblical.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
And then God threw in this.
Yeah.
But do you use music or something? You had told me that you work, it's almost a dance motion, or something you do as you paint.
Yeah, I don't use music. In fact, when I first started doing this, I had a rule to not use music. So if I was listening to music, I was ready to paint, I'd turn the music off, because I wanted to listen to what was going on inside my body, rather than being influenced by the music. That was like a different level of attention, which I didn't want to follow necessarily.
Do you know, as you begin a piece, what it's going to be?
I've done this spontaneous work long enough so that I know how it's going to form. It's sort of like I generate it, so it's like a crystal. So I generally know how the crystal is going to form, but I don't necessarily know exactly what it's going to look like. I'm so spontaneous, I don't even know where my arm's going to go to hit the canvas. And what I've developed is a repertoire, a vocabulary of different tools that make different kinds of marks. I've taken things from nature, store-bought things, and they all have different marks. So through that collection of different marks, I can build up an image that has a variety in it. I also have noticed there are certain levels of density that are intriguing to me. It may start off, there may be a level that's intriguing, and when I keep going, that will dissipate, and then another level will come. So it keeps coming back once in a while. And how I compose is based on levels. So I do one level and do another level on top. I don't compose according to the placement on the canvas at all.
There's just something on television about new discoveries that have been made by certain kind of microscopes, or people that are using these microscopes. They've been able to take masterpieces and they go under and they find out that, oh, Leonardo really had two horses there, and one of them painted over, and it was a war, it wasn't just a skirmish, that kind of thing. They go all the way down to the drawing. And so I'm thinking, in 1,000 years from now, they'll be looking at your paintings and go, oh, he was this way, that level. But you can actually film your levels too. You can make the whole process into a piece of art too, not just the thing that people see at the end, if you wanted to.
That's a good idea. It could even be an animation of sorts. If I had a frame to put it on, I could do a few strokes, take a picture. I never thought of that. It's a good idea.
Well,
Watch
you can take it.
as it's going.
Do you ever feel that the canvas itself is limiting? I mean, what if you painted inside a cylinder or something where the edges were not the same?
Yeah, that's interesting. Someone else has suggested that to me, and I had that idea before. It's not something I've ever done. Usually I paint flat, but I've painted on a wall. I've painted on a large drawing that spanned several feet, and so I would move as, spontaneously here or there. The interesting thing is my movement kind of doesn't go too high or too low, so there's generally like a river down the middle of it. And some spots on the top, some spots on the bottom, but just right about this level, there's a lot of density.
Sort of reflecting the human form of the person that's doing it.
Yeah, actually, if it's hung at the same level, it's a pretty accurate document of what I was doing. I have done some other ones that I hang up that are a little higher than me, and I paint in the same way, and the paper goes all the way down to the floor. And they reflect the same thing, most density in the middle, but some a little above and some below. And I like that for exactly the reason that you state, because it's a reflection of my presence there.
Right.
If it's hung at the same height that I painted it at.
We have to stipulate that.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Well, you and I met in a dance class given by Anna Halprin.
Yes.
And so how long have you been doing dance, and do you feel like it intersects with your visual art work?
I've been doing dance since I was a little kid. I wouldn't let my schoolmates know, but I took tap dance as, I guess I was about 11 or 12, so something not to tell my friends.
Too bad you had to hide it. That's really a sad commentary on
well, that's okay.
high school culture.
It might stay, well, younger than middle school, what they say now, but we still might have to hide it, But I loved Fred Astaire, and I always liked dancing. And actually in high school, I actually I went to this alternative art high school called Renaissance, and one of the things, this woman would come in and teach interpretive dance to just a few students who were interested in it. So I loved that, and my parents would take us to see various dance companies, Pilobolus and other things like that. But I've never really pursued it as like a career, just something that I'm interested in, moving my body. As far as it be connected to my art, the movement is very spontaneous when I do my art. And I explored that. It first came out doing art. It was very automatic. And I could only really do this thing when I was facing my drawing table. But at some point, a few years later, I discovered I could do it away from my drawing table. So now I do these automatic movement, you could call them dances or just experiences. And it's not a dance in the same way as my artwork is not placed. It's not a dance in that I don't preconceive it. It's a movement. And I don't know if somebody's seeing it would necessarily call it a dance or not. That depends on someone's preconceived definition of what dance is.
Do you have it on your website?
I have it on a website.
Can you give that?
I'll give the website for where my art is. My art is at www.bretarenson.com. That's BRETARENSON.com. If you write me a link, I will send you. If you write me a letter, I'll send you a link to the other website. I had someone. I talked to a career counselor, and she suggested I don't show people and don't talk about what I do. Because
some more conservative bosses of some day job somewhere are not going to think it's cool, or what?
Well, specifically about galleries, they might be disturbed about what I do and what I talk and how I talk about it.
Artists are supposed to be pushing the envelope or breaking through and stuff, and it's just, when you look at the history of art, people are always, outlaws of some sort or other.
Yeah.
And yet, we have to, just to live in this culture, we have to sort of hold back, I think, sometimes.
That's sort of the dilemma with what she said, is to be accepted into a culture, to be understood, have to be at a certain level. If you go beyond it, you'll be marginalized. But you're exactly right. It's more interesting, I think, for me, and I think for a lot of artists, to go to that other level. Sometimes it comes out of them just naturally. And it's kind of funny. I always think, the artist, they work to get something that's so rarefied or so refined or so different, and then they wonder why nobody understands them. But it's part of I think it's part of the process. It's part of the exploration.
Yeah.
But one thing I want to say about I have put videos. I've done some public presentations of me doing this dance, and I put them on another website. And I think, in a way, for me personally, having them separate is kind of makes it easier for me. I don't have to tie them in. I don't have to, in that same respect that I was just talking, I don't have to make sure everyone understands or even sees it.
Right.
So I can concentrate on the movement-based work separately from the artwork, and I can show the artwork separate from the other one, and I don't necessarily have to tie them in unless you're interested.
Right. That makes sense, because I was just thinking architecture has been said to be frozen music. So I'm thinking, you see the building, you experience it, but very rarely do you look at the drawings and the models. It's like a very big treat to actually see how the thinking was, but often you don't need to really be able to either enjoy, appreciate, or use the result.
Yeah, I think that's a lesson for me in presenting my artwork, that I felt that it was important for people to understand. But now I think maybe it's not so important. Though I still want them to understand, I still want to share with them in some way, and I have that outlet.
But you can write something at like if you're in an exhibit, you write about the process and stuff. Right?
Yeah.
Can you? We didn't rehearse this, but with your hands, can you say like, "This is me as a painter, and this is the canvas, and this is what I do"? Can you like sort of do a?
No, I can't. I'm not going to do that either.
Okay. I'm curious, because I don't know what you do. I just have heard about it. It's very intriguing, but maybe one of these days I'll get to see it.
Yeah. It's on this other website, and if anybody wants to contact me through my main website, look at my artwork, I'll be happy to share with them. But
good. Okay, that's a good screening technique.
I'm gonna yeah.
If you are worthy, you may see it. I was wondering about the titles of your pieces, because you have some very interesting titles, and I was also wondering when you know what to call something, what to call a painting, when it comes to you.
Well, most titles come afterwards, but some of them I have an idea that I'm investigating, so that I want to. So the idea is already there. Some ideas are less. Formalized in my mind, and just sort of a color exploration or a mark exploration. A lot of the ideas are very conceptual, and I think you may read them and may not see any connection with the painting, but I think I do, and I think a lot of artists have a certain thought process that helps them decide what to do in their work that may not always be obvious in the work as a result. But to me, that's very important.
For now, I want to say thank you very much
Thank you very
for
much,
being
Sharon.
here, Bret Arenson, a fine artist. I'm here today speaking with Julie Motz, healer, author, and radio host. I've been reading emails from you because you have workshops and you send them out, and I'm very intrigued by what you're doing. I'd like to know, first of all, what are your workshops about?
Well, I'm currently running 2 healing workshops here in Marin. One of them is called Intimacy and Consciousness. It's an attempt to enhance people's ability to be intimate and to be conscious, and it's really a group in which we do very, very deep emotional work. In fact, every time I send out an announcement with a caveat, this group is not for everybody.
I noticed that.
If you're not going to prepare to be really a critical observer of yourself, and you don't want to do really deep emotional work, because I really want people who are prepared to go very, very deep into their own lives. Because, I started my healing work in the operating room. I started as a healer in surgery, working with people who were having surgery. And I discovered that even with the most profound physical ailment, there's a deep emotional undercurrent that has to be dealt with. And so it was really working in surgery that got me to deal most deeply with people's emotions.
How would you do the kind of healing you're talking about in a surgical arena.
Well, actually, I've written a whole book about that. It's called Hands of Life, and it's available in the Marin Library System. And I would stand in front of the anesthesiologist, which is outside of the sterile field, but I would have my hands on the head of the patient, unless, of course, it was brain surgery, in which case I would have my hands on the feet of the patient. And I would monitor what was happening emotionally and physically, actually, in the operating room. And I would read what was happening with the patient emotionally, and when there were rough spots for the patient emotionally, I would be very present and help the patient process whatever old trauma would come up during the surgery.
And how would you know what the patient was going through?
I would get images. I would get images.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Even if the person were they were out?
People
Like
are not unconscious under anesthesia. That's a common misconception.
Okay, paralyzed.
The brain waves are very, very different. They are not. They're not aware. I mean, but it's not the same as being knocked out cold. So their hearing still works, and there are all kinds of parts of the brain that are still very, very much alive.
Do you talk to the person before the surgery so you get to know
I
them?
usually prepare them. I would take them step by step through the surgery. I would see what parts of the surgery the body was least comfortable with. I would try to comfort the body, and then I would go into the operating room and I would be there with them from the moment they were wheeled in. And then I would work with them again after the surgery.
That must be very comforting to that person.
It definitely seemed to be.
Is it covered by insurance?
It wasn't covered by insurance. It wasn't covered by insurance.
One can always hope, right? I just think that would be a wonderful thing. I haven't heard of that.
Well, it's something that I started. I started way back east in New York at Columbia Presbyterian with a now well-known doctor, Mehmet Oz, although he was in those days the youngest surgeon on the cardiothoracic service. And I started working with Mehmet when I was getting a master's in public health at Columbia, and he actually knew very little about alternative medicine in those days. And I came and did these very, very far out things. Eventually it was too far out for Columbia. And then I got a grant to come out to Cal Pacific and work with women having surgery for breast cancer. The Susan G. Komen Foundation gave me that grant. So I worked out here for a year. I worked with 20 women having surgery for breast cancer. And I liked it so much that I decided I would spend half the year here and half the year back in New York. And eventually, after 6 years of that, I moved out here full time. And I don't work in surgery anymore unless it's for a very, very dear friend, although I still prepare people for surgery. But I do a lot of healing in other venues. I see people privately, and I run 2 healing groups. I run this intimacy and consciousness group, in which I do 2 things. I cover major issues. I just did a group on self-sabotage, which is a big issue for people. I also try to introduce people to my ideas about emotional defenses and emotional personality types and the physiology of your emotional personality type. And then I run a group called Food and Feeling, because I feel people have so many emotional issues surrounding food, and I did for many, many years. And in that group, people's issues around food and their bodies are specifically addressed.
Do people find themselves in the workshop that's the right one for them?
They bring whatever they need to bring to whatever group or workshop they show up for. So it always turns out to be the right one to them, because I'm always more responsive to what people need than what my plans are. I mean, my plan is just a general framework to gather people together for the purpose of healing. Then I just have to, be responsive to whomever shows up with whatever they show up with, and whatever issues come out, in the course of the group or the workshop.
Well, how did you come to this kind of healing? And do you still get images? I mean, you walk into a room with strangers, do you get messages or images about that person?
Only if I stop to focus that way. But usually, it's like, if you're watching a movie and you're an editor, you don't notice the cuts if the movie is really good. You just get swept along with the story. But if you watch it a second time, or if the movie isn't good, then you notice the cuts. So if someone is, perfectly normal and okay, and I'm just chatting with them, I don't get images from their childhood. But if someone is disturbed and is presenting themselves to me to be helped, then my focus shifts and I get the images and feed them back to them.
Do you think that person is sending those images out because they want help, or is it just something in their field?
I think the body is broadcasting the images all the time, because they do want help. They do want to be seen. When you've been traumatized as a child, there is always this stress between wanting to tell the truth, wanting the truth to be seen, and the terror of what will happen. So you send out coded messages, and you hope that someone will read the code and then read it back to you in some way that you will find manageable.
Well, it's a very precious thing to find someone that has that skill.
I think everybody has the skill, or everybody has the ability. I've developed the skill by being tremendously interested in it and just focusing on it for years and years and years.
How many people do you have at a workshop, typical?
Well, I'm about to do a training. I'm doing a training in February and again in April, and I've limited that to 8. And that's a 5-day training because I want to, I'm really training people. I'm developing them to do what I do. So that's very focused. The groups, the monthly groups are usually between 10 and 17 people. And then when I teach workshops at places, it can be, anything from 10 to 30 people.
And does everyone get something out of it, or just some, or most, or some people
I would
resist?
say from the feedback that I get that most people get something out of it. And but in the past, people have had issues. People have shown up and not been prepared for the depth of the work, and that's why now I interview people. Not for the groups, but for the trainings. I interview them first. I want to find out where they are. I want to find out how much work they've done on themselves. And I want to find out if the idea of finding out what really happened between you and mommy and daddy is going to horrify you or interest you. How deep people are really willing to go. Because I don't want to throw people into shock. I don't want to override anybody's defenses before they're ready to lay them aside. That's not productive.
Well, that's a lot of research you have to do before you know that person is basically okay with it.
But it makes the group go so much better. It just makes it so much better.
As a group, do the people interact with each other? Are they then able to start reading each other's?
They do to a certain extent. They do to a certain extent, yes. And not everybody shows up for the group all the time, so there are new people coming in all the time. But they pick up the spirit of it and the feeling of it.
I wish we could see a session or envision it now.
If I've thought a lot about videotaping the groups because I think it would be tremendously helpful, but there are privacy issues involved.
Right. Well, people could have bags over their heads, or we could,
but since reading
bars
facial expressions and gestures, and particularly what people do with their mouths, is very, very important part of my observation as the group leader, I don't think that would quite work. I don't think I could quite read the paper bags with the acuity that I read a face.
But I wonder, sometimes, I don't know if it really works, but they used to put bars over, black things over people's eyes, and supposedly then you wouldn't recognize them.
You could do that.
I don't know.
But I think even to be emoting at the level of people emote in front of a television crew might be, I think would put an extra barrier towards people because people become very, very vulnerable. But I've thought about doing that. I've thought about doing it and just having it for myself to look at afterwards and review and think about, I didn't notice this person here seems a little spaced out. I didn't pick that up.
Right.
Because I feel that part of my job when I'm running a group is to make sure that everybody stays present and nobody goes into shock. And if anything happens, to investigate that and pull them back.
How would you pull somebody back out of shock?
Well, first I'd say, I noticed you just yawned when Helen was speaking. Just before you yawned, what words did you hear her saying? And what did that bring up in you? So you try to bring them back to the moment before and bring them back to present and work
so
in that place.
A yawn is an expression of shock?
Well, it means you're dissociating. You're going into what we call parasympathetic shock. Parasympathetic shock is when the parasympathetic nervous system, the one that slows everything down, takes over. People also go into sympathetic shock, which is when the part of the autonomic nervous system that revs things up takes over. And people can go into either, people start fidgeting suddenly, they're in sympathetic shock. People yawn, they're in parasympathetic shock.
What if they cough, like if they're in an audience and when you're on stage sometimes and you hear somebody cough, I've always felt that means that they've lost interest somehow.
Well, sometimes they really have a bad cough,
Right. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right?
I wouldn't take it so personally. I was in an extraordinary concert. Christian Tetzlaff was playing all the Bach solo partitas and sonatas for violin, which was amazing. And there was a woman who couldn't stop coughing. I thought the man sitting behind her was going to strangle her, but she obviously was just very, very sick. Although Tetzlaff picked up every cough in the audience. You could see him responding, and knowing exactly where everybody was.
You mean the musician?
The violinist, yes.
You could tell by his expression or by what he was playing?
I heard later from the woman who was the PR person. But anyway, I don't want to get off on that.
That's very interesting. Well, we only have a few minutes, but I wanted to ask you about your radio show just to let people know that you do that.
I have 2 radio shows on KWMR. You can listen online on kwmr.org.
Well, that's good to know.
And the first and third Wednesdays of the month, it's Arts Desire, about the arts and entertainment. And the second and fourth Wednesday of every month, it's Hot Tech Cool Science, about science and technology, where I get to talk to all kinds of scientists and technological people and get all my questions answered.
Isn't it exciting? I have to tell the audience that this is a great thing to do.
I very much enjoy it. I very much enjoy it because I'm a person. I mean, healing is my life. It's what I'm totally devoted to. It's my avocation as well as my vocation. I wouldn't even say healing, but studying emotional shock and trauma and how it affects people. But I grew up in a family where my father was a scientist. My mother was an English teacher. We always had a great interest in art and science. And I get to indulge both of those with the radio show. And each is healing in its own way.
I'm very intrigued by your classes and your workshops, and I'm drawn to it, and it's probably because I know that I could benefit. And I was wondering about the visual aspect of it. Did you ever study imagery or guided imagery, or is this something that just comes to you?
Well,
this has to be our last question. So.
I do what people call guided imagery, in that if I sense that an issue comes from a previous time in somebody's life, I will take them back to their life in the womb. And I'll make very definite visual suggestions and visceral suggestions and breathing suggestions to take them back there. You know. So I'll say, imagine your body as if you had radial symmetry instead of bilateral symmetry, because that's how a fetus experiences itself. So I give very definite images to help people go back and to put themselves in an earlier time in their lives.
And it helps them.
Oh, tremendously. You'd be amazed what happens.
And
when it's too much, they fall asleep. If they hit a time in gestation during the pregnancy that was too much for them, they'll just fall right asleep. I'll be talking and saying, and now, this is what's happening, and they're just gone. And then at that point, that's where a severe trauma occurred during the pregnancy.
Amazing. Well, you are definitely an astute person and not just out there in the new age-ism of things.
No, I'm definitely not in that. As I always said, I'm more interested in physics than metaphysics.
Well, I once met a medicine man and somebody said, do you believe in the supernatural? And he said, I believe in the natural, and that's super. And
exactly as I would characterize it.
Thank you very much, Julie Motz, for being here on Marinations with us.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.